The old pickup truck rattled down the dusty dirt road, leaving a cloud of brown dust behind it. Sarah pressed her small face against the window, watching the endless fields of corn and wheat stretch out like a golden ocean. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that breakfast had been nothing more than a stale piece of bread and water from the kitchen faucet. "Where are we going, Mama?" Sarah asked for the third time that morning. Her mother, Linda, gripped the steering wheel tighter. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights, too many unpaid bills, and too many doors slammed in her face. "I told you, baby. We're going to visit a nice man who might be able to help us." Linda's voice cracked slightly. She had been driving for 2 hours, following directions she had gotten from a woman at the homeless shelter. The woman had whispered about a rancher who sometimes helped families in trouble, but Linda wasn't sure if the story was true or just another dead end. Sarah was only 7 years old, but she understood more than her mother realized. She knew they had lost their apartment 3 weeks ago. She knew they had been sleeping in the car or staying at different shelters. She knew her mother cried when she thought Sarah was asleep. Most importantly, she knew her mother was getting sicker every day. The coughing had started months ago, just a little hack here and there. But now Linda could barely make it through a sentence without doubling over in a fit that left her gasping for air. She had lost so much weight that her clothes hung on her like empty sacks. When she thought Sarah wasn't looking, Linda would check her reflection in store windows, shocked by the hollow-eyed stranger staring back at her. The truck turned into a long gravel driveway lined with tall oak trees. At the end of the drive stood a modest farmhouse painted white with green shutters. Behind it, Sarah could see red barns and fenced pastures where horses grazed peacefully. It looked like something from a storybook, so different from the cramped city apartment they used to call home. A man emerged from one of the barns as they pulled up. He was tall and lean, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and hands that looked strong from years of hard work. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, and he moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent his life working with animals. Linda turned off the engine and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the windshield, she watched the man approach their truck. His face was kind but weathered like leather that had been left in the sun. She had practiced what she would say during the long drive, but now all her words seemed to disappear. "Stay here for a minute, Sarah," Linda said, opening her door. The rancher stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "I'm Jack Morrison," he said simply. "You must be Linda." Mary from the shelter called and said you might be coming by. Linda nodded, suddenly feeling very small, standing next to this confident man on his own land. "Yes, sir. I'm Linda Parker, and this is my daughter, Sarah." She gestured toward the truck, where Sarah's curious face was visible through the window. "What can I do for you, Linda?" Jack's voice was gentle, without judgment. Linda had rehearsed this moment, but standing here in the bright morning sun, she felt the words catch in her throat. How do you tell a stranger that you're dying? How do you explain that you've failed at everything? Keeping a job, keeping an apartment, keeping food on the table for your child. "I don't have much time," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors, they say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less." She paused, watching Jack's face for signs of pity or discomfort, but his expression remained steady and compassionate. "I've got lung cancer, and I can't afford the treatment. I've tried everything, applied for every program, every charity, every grant I could find. I've got no family left, no friends who can help." Linda's voice grew stronger as she continued. "But I'm not here about me. I'm here about Sarah." Jack glanced toward the truck where the little girl was now pressing both hands against the window, her breath fogging up the glass. "I need to know she'll be safe when I'm gone," Linda continued. "I can't bear the thought of her ending up in the system, bouncing from foster home to foster home. She's such a good kid, Mr. Morrison. She's smart and funny and kind. She deserves better than what I've been able to give her." The words tumbled out faster now, as if Linda was afraid she might lose her nerve. "Mary at the shelter told me you sometimes help people. She said you and your wife took in kids before. I know it's a lot to ask. I know you don't even know us, but I'm desperate. I'll do anything, sign any papers, whatever you need. I just need to know my baby girl will be okay. Jack listened quietly, his eyes moving between Linda and the truck where Sarah was now waving shyly at him through the window. He had heard stories like this before, but they never got easier. Why don't you both come inside? Jack said finally. We can talk more comfortable-like in the kitchen. My wife Margaret's making coffee, and I think we might have some cookies that would interest young Sarah there. Linda felt a rush of hope mixed with terror. At least he wasn't sending them away immediately. She walked back to the truck and helped Sarah out. Who is that man, Mama? Sarah asked, taking her mother's hand. His name is Mr. Morrison, and he's going to talk with us for a while. Remember your manners, okay? Sarah nodded solemnly. She had learned to be on her best behavior around adults who might help them. She smoothed down her wrinkled dress, one of only 3 outfits she owned, and followed her mother toward the house. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of fresh bread. Margaret Morrison was a plump woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked up from her mixing bowl and smiled when she saw Sarah. Well, hello there, sweetie. You must be Sarah. I'm Mrs. Morrison, but you can call me Margaret if you like. Sarah looked up at her mother for permission, then nodded. It's nice to meet you, ma'am. Margaret's heart melted a little at the child's formal politeness. She could see the hunger in Sarah's eyes, the way her clothes were clean but worn thin from too many washings. Would you like some milk and cookies while the grown-ups talk? Margaret asked. Sarah's eyes lit up, but she looked at her mother again. Linda nodded, fighting back tears at how grateful her daughter looked over something as simple as cookies and milk. While Margaret got Sarah settled at the kitchen table with a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies, Jack and Linda sat in the living room. The house was comfortable without being fancy, worn furniture that spoke of a family that had lived and loved here for many years. Tell me about Sarah, Jack said, settling back in his chair. For the first time that day, Linda smiled. She's the best thing I ever did right. She's in 2nd grade, and her teacher says she reads at a 4th grade level. She loves animals, especially horses, though she's never been around them much. She's never been in trouble at school, never given me a hard time about anything, even when things got really bad. Linda's voice grew softer. She used to ask me why we had to move so much, why we couldn't go home. But she stopped asking. She just accepts whatever happens. That's not normal for a 7-year-old, is it? She should be complaining, asking for toys, being difficult sometimes. Instead, she helps me however she can and never asks for anything. From the kitchen came the sound of Sarah's voice, telling Margaret about a book she had been reading at the library. Her voice was animated in a way Linda rarely heard anymore. What about her father? Jack asked gently. Linda's face hardened. He left when Sarah was 2. Said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he had his own life to live. I haven't heard from him since, and I don't want to. Sarah deserves better than a man who could walk away from his own child. Jack nodded. He had seen enough abandoned children to understand the damage that kind of rejection could cause. I worked as a waitress for years after he left, Linda continued. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us afloat. We had a little apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Sarah had her own bedroom with a bed shaped like a car that she loved. I was even saving up for a bicycle for her birthday. Linda's voice caught. Then I got sick and couldn't work regular hours anymore. The coughing fits would come at the worst times, right in the middle of serving customers. My boss was patient at first, but eventually he had to let me go. That's when everything fell apart. How long ago was that? Jack asked. For months. I've been trying to find work ever since, but who wants to hire someone who might collapse during a shift? We burned through my savings in 6 weeks. Then we lost the apartment. I sold everything I could, including Sarah's car bed and most of her toys. I told her we were just simplifying our lives, but I think she knew better. In the kitchen, they could hear Margaret asking Sarah about school, about her favorite subjects. Sarah's responses were polite, but guarded, the way a child learns to be when they've learned that adults might disappear from their lives without warning. I've been thinking about this for weeks, Linda said, lowering her voice. At first, I thought maybe I could beat this thing, that the doctors were wrong. But the coughing is getting worse, and I can barely keep food down anymore. I lost 15 pounds last month alone. She looked directly at Jack. I need to know that when I can't take care of her anymore, Sarah won't end up forgotten in some group home. She needs stability, people who will love her, and help her grow up right. I can see this is a good place, a safe place. And the way your wife is with her in there. Linda gestured toward the kitchen. Margaret always wanted a house full of children, Jack said quietly. We had 2 boys of our own, but they're grown now with families of their own. She's helped raise several foster children over the years, and each time one of them left, it broke her heart a little more. So you understand what I'm asking? Jack was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of his wife's laughter mixing with Sarah's giggles from the kitchen. I understand you're a mother trying to do right by her child in an impossible situation. Will you consider it? Taking her in when the time comes. Before Jack could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway, cookie crumbs on her chin. Mama, Mrs. Margaret showed me pictures of her horses, and she said maybe I could see them if it's okay with you. Linda looked at her daughter's excited face, seeing a spark there that had been missing for months. If Mr. and Mrs. Morrison don't mind, that would be nice. I'll take her out of the barn, Jack said, standing up. Give you and Margaret a chance to talk. As Jack and Sarah headed outside, Linda could hear her daughter chattering away, asking questions about the animals, about the farm, about everything she saw. It was the most animated Sarah had been since they lost their home. Margaret came into the living room and sat down beside Linda. She's a sweet child. You've raised her well under difficult circumstances. I'm dying, Linda said bluntly, too tired for gentle approaches. Cancer. I need to know someone will take care of Sarah when I'm gone. Margaret didn't flinch at the direct words. She had been a rancher's wife for 40 years and had learned that sometimes life demanded straight talk. Jack told me what you're asking, Margaret said. It's not a decision we can make lightly. I understand that. I'm not asking for an answer today, but I need to know if it's even possible, if you would consider it. Through the window, they could see Jack leading Sarah toward the barn, her small hand in his large one. The sight made Linda's heart ache with hope and grief at the same time. What does Sarah know about your condition? Margaret asked. She knows I'm sick, but not how sick. I keep telling her the doctors are going to help me get better. I don't know how to tell a 7-year-old that her mother is dying. Margaret nodded. That's a conversation no parent should have to have. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the window as Jack lifted Sarah up so she could pet the nose of a gentle mare. Sarah's laughter floated back to the house on the afternoon breeze. I need to ask you something difficult, Margaret said finally. If we agree to this, how do we handle the transition? How do we help a little girl who's already lost everything understand that she's about to lose the one person who matters most to her? Linda had thought about this question every sleepless night for weeks. I don't know, she admitted. I've read books, talked to counselors at the hospital. Everyone says honesty is best, but how do you be honest about something so awful? Maybe we start with visits, Margaret suggested. If you're comfortable with it, you and Sarah could come here regularly. Let her get used to us, to this place. When the time comes, it won't be such a shock. The suggestion filled Linda with both relief and sadness. Relief that these people might actually help her daughter. Sadness that she was planning for a future she wouldn't be part of. Outside, they could see Jack showing Sarah how to brush the horse's mane. The little girl's face was serious with concentration, and the big animal stood perfectly still, as if it understood how important this moment was. She's always loved animals, Linda said. When she was little, she used to rescue every injured bird or stray cat she found. I always had to explain that we couldn't keep them, that we didn't have space or money for pets. Well, we've got plenty of both here, Margaret said with a smile. When Jack and Sarah returned from the barn, Sarah was practically bouncing with excitement. Mama, did you know that horses can live to be 30 years old? And that mare's name is Buttercup, and she's going to have a baby horse next spring. Linda smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, filing away this moment to remember later when the dark times came. What do you say to Mr. and Mrs. Morrison for being so nice to us? Linda prompted. Thank you for the cookies and for letting me meet Buttercup, Sarah said politely. Then, more shyly, she added, could we maybe come back and visit again sometime? Linda looked at Jack and Margaret, hope and desperation warring in her eyes. I think that could be arranged, Jack said carefully, if your mama thinks it's a good idea. As they prepared to leave, Margaret packed a bag with leftover cookies and sandwiches for their dinner. Jack walked them to their truck, his mind already turning over the enormous decision they were being asked to make. Take some time to think about it, Linda said as she started the engine. I know it's a lot to ask. It's not too much to ask, Jack replied. A mother wanting to protect her child. There's nothing more natural than that. As they drove away, Sarah turned around in her seat to wave goodbye until the farmhouse disappeared around a bend in the road. I like them, Mama, Sarah said quietly. They're nice people. Yes, they are, baby. Yes, they are. Linda drove back toward town with tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. She had found good people, people who might love her daughter the way Sarah deserved to be loved. It wasn't the life Linda had planned for her child, but maybe it could be a good life nonetheless. That night, as they settled down to sleep in the back seat of their car in a church parking lot, Sarah snuggled close to her mother. Mama, do you think we'll see Buttercup again soon? I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. Linda held her daughter close, listening to her breathing slow as sleep took over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worries, new fears. But tonight, for the first time in months, Linda fell asleep with something that felt almost like peace. 3 weeks passed before Linda gathered the courage to call the Morrisons. During those weeks, she had watched Sarah's face light up every time someone mentioned horses or farms. The little girl had drawn pictures of Buttercup on napkins and the backs of old receipts, carefully coloring them with broken crayons they had found at the shelter. Mrs. Morrison? It's Linda Parker. We met a few weeks ago. Linda, how are you and Sarah doing? We've been thinking about you both. The warmth in Margaret's voice almost made Linda cry right there in the payphone outside the grocery store. We're managing. I was wondering, you said Sarah could visit again sometime. Would this weekend be okay? Of course. Jack's been asking about her. He's got a new foal he thinks she'd love to see. When Saturday arrived, Linda noticed Sarah had tried to fix her hair extra nice with a rubber band she had found. The little girl was practically vibrating with excitement as they drove back down that familiar dusty road. This time, Jack was waiting for them in the front yard, a golden retriever at his side. Sarah, he called out as they climbed out of the truck. I'd like you to meet Rusty. He's been waiting to say hello to you. Sarah looked at her mother for permission, then cautiously approached the friendly dog. Rusty seemed to sense her nervousness and sat perfectly still until Sarah reached out to pet his head. Within minutes, the two were fast friends, with Rusty following Sarah everywhere she went. How had you been feeling? Margaret asked Linda quietly as they watched Sarah play with the dog in the yard. Some days are better than others, Linda admitted. The medication helps with the pain, but it makes me so tired. I sleep most of the day now. Margaret noticed how thin Linda had gotten since their last visit. Her clothes hung even looser, and there was a grayish tinge to her skin that spoke of serious illness. Have you talked to Sarah about what's happening? Linda shook her head. I keep trying to find the right words, but how do you prepare a child for something like this? Maybe we could help, Jack suggested, joining their conversation. Margaret has experience with difficult conversations. We've helped other children through tough times. Over the next few hours, Linda watched her daughter bloom in ways she hadn't seen in months. Sarah helped Jack feed the horses, carefully measuring out grain under his patient guidance. She gathered eggs from the chicken coop with Margaret, squealing with delight when one of the hens laid an egg right in her hands. But the most magical moment came when Jack led them to a small pasture behind the main barn. I've got someone special I want you to meet, he told Sarah. In the pasture stood a beautiful chestnut mare with a tiny foal at her side. The baby horse couldn't have been more than a week old, all long legs and fluffy mane. Oh, Sarah breathed, pressing against the fence. He's so little. Jack corrected with a smile. It's a little girl, and she doesn't have a name yet. The mama's name is Honey, and this little one was born just a few days ago. Sarah watched in wonder as the foal nursed from her mother, then stumbled around the pasture on unsteady legs. She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she whispered. Would you like to help me take care of her? Jack asked. She'll need to learn how to trust people, and that's a very important job. Sarah nodded eagerly, then looked at her mother. Can I, Mama? Linda felt her heart break and heal at the same time. If Mr. Jack thinks you're responsible enough, then yes. That afternoon, Jack taught Sarah how to approach the horses slowly and calmly. He showed her how to let them smell her hand first, how to speak in a gentle voice, how to move without frightening them. Animals can sense our feelings, he explained. If you're scared, they'll be scared too. But if you're calm and kind, they'll trust you. Linda watched from the fence, amazed at how naturally Sarah took to the animals. The little girl seemed to understand instinctively how to move around them, how to show respect while building friendship. She's got a real gift, Margaret said, standing beside Linda. Some people have to work years to develop that kind of connection with animals. For Sarah, it seems to come naturally. As the afternoon wore on, Linda began to feel the familiar tightness in her chest that warned of another coughing fit. She tried to suppress it, not wanting to ruin Sarah's perfect day, but the cough exploded out of her anyway. The fit was worse than usual, leaving her gasping and dizzy. When it finally stopped, she looked up to see Sarah staring at her with frightened eyes. Mama, are you okay? I'm fine, baby. Just a little cough. But Linda could see that Sarah wasn't convinced anymore. The little girl had grown quiet, staying closer to her mother's side for the rest of the visit. That evening, as they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled Linda aside. She's starting to notice, isn't she? Linda nodded miserably. I can't hide it much longer. She's too smart, and I'm getting too sick. Would you like us to be there when you talk to her? Sometimes it helps to have support. Linda considered the offer. She had been dreading that conversation for weeks, practicing different ways to explain the unexplainable. Maybe having these kind people there would make it easier for Sarah to understand. Could we do it here? Next weekend? I think she might take it better in a place where she feels safe and happy. Margaret squeezed her hand. Of course. We'll be here for both of you. The following week passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and sleepless nights. Linda's condition was deteriorating faster than the doctors had predicted. She could barely keep food down, and the pain medication made her feel disconnected from everything around her. Sarah had grown quiet and watchful, helping her mother in small ways without being asked. She would bring Linda water when she coughed, cover her with a blanket when she fell asleep in her chair, and speak in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb her. When Saturday arrived, Linda almost called to cancel. She felt terrible, and the thought of having such a difficult conversation seemed overwhelming. But she knew she couldn't put it off any longer. Sarah was subdued during the drive to the farm. None of her usual excited chatter about the animals. She seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Margaret met them at the door with warm hugs and the promise of hot chocolate. Jack appeared from the barn, concern evident on his weathered face when he saw how frail Linda had become. Why don't we sit by the fireplace? Margaret suggested. It's nice and cozy in there. They settled into the comfortable living room, with Sarah curled up next to her mother on the sofa. The fire crackled quietly, and Rusty lay at Sarah's feet as if sensing she needed extra comfort. Linda had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, all her careful words seemed to vanish. Sarah, honey, we need to talk about something important, she began, her voice already shaky. Sarah looked up at her with those wise, 7-year-old eyes that had seen too much. Is it about why you're so sick, Mama? The question caught Linda off guard. She had expected to break the news gently, to ease into the conversation. But Sarah was ready to hear the truth. Yes, baby. It is about why I'm sick. Sarah waited patiently, her small hand finding her mother's. Do you remember when we talked about how some people get sick and the doctors can make them better? Sarah nodded. Well, sometimes people get sick and the doctors can't make them better. They can help them feel less pain, and they can give them medicine to help them feel a little better, but they can't make the sickness go away. Sarah's grip on her mother's hand tightened. Are you that kind of sick, Mama? Linda's voice broke. Yes, sweetheart. I am. The room was completely quiet except for the crackling fire. Sarah stared at her mother, processing this information with the serious concentration she brought to everything important. Are you going to die? She asked finally, her voice very small. Linda's tears came then, but she forced herself to answer honestly. Yes, baby. Someday I am. Probably soon. Sarah didn't cry. Instead, she climbed into her mother's lap, wrapping her thin arms around Linda's neck. I don't want you to die, Mama. I don't want to die either, sweetheart. I want to stay with you forever and ever. But sometimes we don't get to choose what happens to us. They held each other while Linda cried, and Sarah remained dry-eyed but trembling. After several minutes, Sarah pulled back to look at her mother's face. What will happen to me when you die? This was the moment Linda had been dreading most. Do you remember how Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret have been so nice to us? Sarah nodded. They want to take care of you when I can't anymore. They want you to come live here with them and the horses and Rusty. Sarah looked around the warm, comfortable room, then at Jack and Margaret, who had been sitting quietly nearby. Will I get to see Honey's baby every day? Despite her tears, Linda almost smiled at the question. Every day. And you could help take care of her and all the other animals. Would I have my own room? Yes, Margaret spoke up gently. We've already been thinking about how to fix up the room upstairs for you. It has a big window that looks right out at the horse pasture. Sarah was quiet for a long time, thinking through this enormous change. Finally, she looked back at her mother. Will you visit me sometimes? Linda's heart shattered. Oh, baby, I'll visit you as much as I can for as long as I can. And even after I can't visit anymore, I'll still be with you in here. She placed her hand over Sarah's heart. Every time you do something kind, every time you're brave, every time you laugh, I'll be right there with you. Sarah nodded solemnly, as if filing away this promise for future reference. Can we go see the baby horse now? She asked. I want to tell her that I might get to take care of her all the time. The adults exchanged glances, amazed at this little girl's resilience. Of course we can, Jack said, standing up. I think she's been waiting for you. As they walked to the pasture, Sarah slipped her hand into Jack's while keeping hold of her mother's hand with the other. The gesture wasn't lost on Linda. Her daughter was already beginning to build new bonds while holding onto the old ones. The foal was bigger than she had been the week before, more confident on her legs. When she saw Sarah approaching, she actually trotted over to the fence. Look, Mama, she remembers me. I think she does, Linda agreed, watching her daughter reach through the fence to pet the foal's soft nose. What should we name her? Jack asked Sarah. Sarah thought seriously about this responsibility. Can I name her Hope? Because she gives me hope that everything might be okay. Linda had to turn away to hide her tears. Even facing the worst thing that could happen to a child, Sarah was looking for reasons to hope. Hope is a perfect name, Margaret said, her own voice thick with emotion. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Sarah would start spending weekends at the farm, then gradually more time as Linda became unable to care for her. They would work together to help Sarah adjust to her new life while still honoring her love for her mother. As they prepared to leave that evening, Sarah hugged Jack and Margaret goodbye with real affection. Thank you for letting me name Hope, she told Jack. And thank you for saying I can live here when Mama can't take care of me anymore. Thank you for trusting us to take care of you, Jack replied. During the drive back to town, Sarah was unusually chatty, processing the day's revelations out loud. Mama, will you teach me how to take care of myself before you die? Like how to brush my teeth really good, and how to fix my hair, and how to be polite to grown-ups. Of course, baby. We'll make sure you know everything you need to know. And will you write me letters that Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret can give me later, for when I'm sad or scared? Linda's throat tightened. That's a wonderful idea. I'll write you lots of letters. And will you tell me stories about when you were little so I can remember them and maybe tell them my kids someday? The questions kept coming, each one breaking Linda's heart while also filling her with pride. Her daughter was facing an impossible situation with courage and wisdom that put many adults to shame. That night, Linda started the first letter. She wrote about the day Sarah was born, about her first steps, about the way she used to sing herself to sleep. She wrote about how proud she was, how much she loved her, how Sarah had been the very best thing in her entire life. It was the first of many letters Linda would write in the weeks to come, each one a gift of love for her daughter to open in the future when she needed to remember that she had been cherished beyond measure. Meanwhile, at the farm, Jack and Margaret sat up late into the night, talking about the enormous responsibility they were about to take on. "Are we doing the right thing?" Margaret asked. Jack thought about Sarah's face when she named the full hope, about the way she had naturally reached for his hand while still holding her mother's. "I think we're doing the only thing we can do," he said. "That little girl needs us, and maybe we need her too." In the weeks that followed, Sarah began spending more and more time at the farm. She learned to collect eggs without breaking them, to brush the horses properly, to help Margaret in the kitchen. She was a quick learner and eager to please, but always with one eye on the door, watching for her mother's arrival. Linda visited as often as she could, each trip requiring more effort than the last. But she pushed herself because she could see how important these visits were to Sarah. The little girl was building new attachments while gradually learning that life could continue even when everything changed. The arrangement was working, but everyone knew that the hardest part was still to come. Linda was getting sicker, and soon they would face the moment when temporary visits became permanent residents. But for now, they were building something precious: trust, love, and the foundation of what would become Sarah's new family. It wasn't the life anyone would have chosen, but it was filled with genuine care and the promise of a future where Sarah could grow up surrounded by love. Every evening, Linda added to her collection of letters for Sarah. Letters about courage, about kindness, about the importance of following dreams. Letters that would carry a mother's love forward into a future she wouldn't be part of, but had helped to secure through her own fierce determination to protect her child. 2 months after that difficult conversation by the fireplace, Linda knew her time was running out. The visits to the farm had become more frequent, and Sarah was now spending 5 days a week with the Morrisons. The transition was happening gradually, just as they had planned, but each day brought Linda closer to the moment she dreaded most. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when Linda woke up and couldn't get out of bed. The pain was overwhelming, and she could barely catch her breath. Sarah, who had been sleeping beside her in the small bed at the shelter, immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mama, are you okay?" Linda tried to smile, but the effort was too much. I think we need to call Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret today." Sarah's face went pale, but she nodded with the serious understanding that had become her constant companion. At 7 years old, she had learned to read the signs of her mother's declining health. Margaret answered the phone on the first ring, as if she had been waiting for this call. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, she said simply. "Don't worry about anything, Linda. We'll take care of everything." Jack and Margaret arrived to find Linda barely conscious, with Sarah sitting beside her holding her hand and speaking in a soft, comforting voice. "I've been telling Mama about Hope," Sarah explained as they entered the small room, "about how she's getting bigger and stronger every day. I thought it might make her feel better." Margaret's eyes filled with tears at the sight of this little girl trying to comfort her dying mother. Jack immediately began making arrangements to get Linda to the hospital while Margaret gathered Sarah's few belongings. "Is this it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Is Mama going to die now?" Margaret knelt down to meet Sarah's eyes. "We don't know exactly when, sweetheart, but your Mama is very sick, and she needs to be in a hospital where the doctors can help her feel more comfortable." Sarah nodded, then carefully placed her small hand on her mother's forehead. "Mama, I'm going to go with Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret now, but I'll come visit you every day, okay?" Linda's eyes fluttered open at her daughter's voice. "I love you, baby girl," she whispered. "Be good, be happy." "I will, Mama. I promise." The next few days blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, quiet conversations, and careful preparations. Linda was in and out of consciousness, but during her lucid moments, she made sure to tell Sarah how proud she was, how much she loved her, and how happy she was that Sarah would be living with such wonderful people. The letters. Linda whispered to Margaret during one of these moments when Sarah was in the hospital cafeteria with Jack. "I wrote her letters, they're in my purse. For later, when she needs them." Margaret found the thick stack of envelopes, each one carefully labeled. "For when you're scared, for your first day of school, for when you miss me, for when you need to remember how much I love you." There were dozens of them, a mother's love translated into words that would comfort her daughter for years to come. On Thursday evening, Linda called for Sarah one last time. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, her voice barely audible. Sarah climbed onto the hospital bed and snuggled close to her mother, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. "I need to tell you something very important," Linda said. "You are the most wonderful daughter a mother could ever ask for. You are kind and brave and smart, and you're going to grow up to do amazing things." Sarah listened solemnly, storing away every word. "Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret love you very much, and they're going to take such good care of you. But more important than that, you're going to take good care of yourself. You're going to make good choices and treat people kindly and follow your dreams." "I will, Mama." "And Sarah, when you think about me, I want you to smile, not cry. Because every day I had with you was the best day of my life. You were my greatest joy, and that will never change." They fell asleep together that way, mother and daughter curled up in the narrow hospital bed. Linda died peacefully just before dawn on Friday morning, with Sarah still sleeping in her arms. The funeral was small, but meaningful. Linda was buried in the town cemetery under an oak tree, with a simple headstone that read, "Linda Parker, beloved mother." Sarah stood between Jack and Margaret, holding both their hands as they said goodbye. "She's not really gone," Sarah said quietly as they walked away from the grave. "She's still in my heart, just like she promised." The first few weeks at the farm were an adjustment for everyone. Sarah moved into the upstairs bedroom that Margaret had carefully prepared, with its big window overlooking the horse pasture. She could see Hope grazing with her mother every morning when she woke up. Some nights, Sarah cried for her mama. Jack and Margaret took turns sitting with her, reading her stories, or just holding her until she fell asleep. They never tried to replace Linda's memory or minimize Sarah's loss. Instead, they helped her honor her mother while building new bonds. "It's okay to be sad," Margaret would tell her. "When you love someone very much, it hurts when they go away. But that hurt means the love was real, and the love part never goes away." Slowly, Sarah began to settle into her new life. She enrolled in the local school, where her teacher was amazed by her reading abilities and her gentle way with the class pets. She made friends with other children on the school bus, shy at first, but gradually opening up. At home on the farm, she thrived. Jack taught her how to ride, starting with the gentlest horse and working up to more spirited mounts as her confidence grew. She had a natural seat and an intuitive understanding of the animals that impressed even the local horse trainer who came to give lessons. Hope, the foal Sarah had named, became especially attached to her. The young horse would actually run to the fence when she saw Sarah coming, nickering with excitement. Under Jack's guidance, Sarah learned to halter train Hope, to lead her around the paddock, and eventually to prepare her for riding. "That horse thinks you're her mother," Jack observed one day as Hope followed Sarah around the pasture like a devoted dog. "Maybe we're both orphans who got lucky," Sarah replied, a comment that showed wisdom far beyond her 8 years. Margaret made sure Sarah had everything a growing girl needed: new clothes that fit properly, school supplies, birthday parties, and sleepovers with friends. But more than material things, she provided the emotional stability and unconditional love that Sarah craved. The letters Linda had written became treasures that Sarah rationed carefully. When she was scared before a school presentation, Margaret would give her the envelope marked for when you're scared. When she missed her mother particularly badly, there was a letter for that too. Each one was filled with Linda's love and pride, her hopes for Sarah's future, and gentle advice for navigating life's challenges. As Sarah's 8th birthday approached, she seemed thoughtful and a little sad. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Margaret asked one evening as they worked together in the kitchen. "Mama won't be here for my birthday," Sarah said simply. "It will be my first birthday without her." Margaret's heart ached for this little girl who had faced so much loss. "You're right. She won't be here in the way we can see and touch. But I think she'll be here in other ways." On Sarah's birthday morning, she found a special letter on her pillow, one marked for your 8th birthday. Inside, Linda had written about the day Sarah was born, about her first birthday party, about how she hoped Sarah would always remember to make a wish when she blew out her candles. "Make a wish for something wonderful," Linda had written, "and remember that my wish for you already came true. You found people who will love you and keep you safe." The birthday party was everything 8-year-olds dream of: cake, presents, friends, and games. But the most meaningful moment came when Jack led Hope, now a yearling, into the yard wearing a big bow. "Hope is officially yours now," he announced. "Your very own horse." Sarah threw her arms around Hope's neck, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Did you hear that, Hope? We belong to each other now." That evening, as the party wound down, Sarah stood by her bedroom window looking out at the pasture where Hope grazed peacefully in the moonlight. "I think Mama would be happy," she said to Margaret, who had come tuck her in. "I know she would be," Margaret replied. "She wanted you to be safe and loved and happy. Look around, sweetheart. You're all of those things." As the months turned into years, Sarah continued to flourish. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects like biology and environmental science. Her teachers weren't surprised when she announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. "I want to help animals the way Mr. Jack and Mrs. Margaret helped me," she explained. "I want to take care of things that need taking care of." Hope grew into a beautiful, intelligent horse who competed in local shows with Sarah as a rider. They won ribbons and trophies, but more importantly, they had forged a bond that exemplified the healing power of love and trust. Jack and Margaret officially adopted Sarah on her 10th birthday, making her legally and permanently part of their family. She kept her mother's last name as her middle name, Sarah Parker Morrison, ensuring that Linda's memory would always be part of her identity. "Now it's official," Jack said as they left the courthouse. "You're stuck with us forever." "Good," Sarah replied with a grin. "I was hoping you'd say that." When Sarah turned 16, she began working part-time at the local veterinary clinic, learning from Dr. Martinez about animal care and medicine. She was a natural with a gentle touch and an ability to calm frightened animals that reminded everyone of her way with Hope years earlier. "She's got something special," Dr. Martinez told Jack and Margaret. "Some people have to learn to connect with animals. For Sarah, it's just part of who she is." Sarah had grown into a confident, compassionate teenager who volunteered at the animal shelter, helped younger students with their schoolwork, and still read every one of her mother's letters whenever she faced a difficult decision. The farm had become a refuge for other children over the years, too. Jack and Margaret, inspired by their success with Sarah, began taking in other foster children who needed temporary homes. Sarah became a big sister figure to these younger kids, helping them adjust and showing them that difficult beginnings didn't have to mean sad endings. "You understand what they're going through," Margaret observed one day as Sarah patiently taught a shy 6-year-old how to approach the horses. "I remember what it felt like to be scared and sad and not know if anyone would really care about me," Sarah replied. "I want them to know what I learned, that families aren't just about blood. They're about love and choosing to take care of each other." When Sarah graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, she dedicated her speech to three groups of people. Her mother, Linda, who had sacrificed everything to ensure her safety, Jack and Margaret, who had opened their hearts and home, and all the children in foster care who were still waiting for their own happy endings. 10 years ago, my mother made the hardest decision a parent can make, she told the assembled crowd. She asked strangers to love her child when she couldn't anymore. Today, I'm standing here not as a victim of circumstances, but as proof that love really can overcome anything. In the audience, Jack wiped away tears while Margaret clutched a tissue. In the front row sat several of the foster children who had found temporary homes with them over the years, all of whom looked up to Sarah as their role model and big sister. Sarah was accepted to veterinary school on a full scholarship. On the day before she left for college, she rode Hope out to her mother's grave for a private conversation. "I wanted to tell you that I kept my promise," she said, sitting on the grass beside the headstone. "I've been good, and I've been happy. Jack and Margaret love me so much, and I love them too. I hope that makes you proud." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree overhead, and Sarah chose to interpret it as her mother's approval. "I'm going to become a veterinarian, and someday I'm going to have a practice where I help animals and their families. I'm going to volunteer with foster children and maybe even adopt some kids of my own someday. I'm going to live the kind of life that makes a difference." Sarah stayed for an hour, telling her mother about her plans, her dreams, and the wonderful family that had grown from such a sad beginning. When she finally stood to leave, she placed a fresh bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. "Thank you for making the hardest choice," she whispered. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." That evening, the Morrison family had a farewell dinner together. Sarah looked around the table at the faces that had become so dear to her. Jack, whose patient guidance had taught her about strength and integrity. Margaret, whose nurturing love had helped heal her broken heart. And three younger foster children who were temporarily part of their family. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "when I was 7 years old, I thought my life was ending. But it wasn't ending at all. It was just beginning." Jack raised his glass of apple cider in a toast. "To new beginnings that grow from love. To the best daughter we could have asked for," Margaret added. "To families that choose each other," Sarah concluded. As they clinked glasses, Sarah caught sight of Hope grazing peacefully in the moonlit pasture outside the dining room window. The horse had grown from a frightened foal into a confident, beautiful animal, just as Sarah had grown from a scared, grieving child into a confident young woman ready to make her mark on the world. Years later, Dr. Sarah Parker Morrison would establish a veterinary practice that specialized in helping rescue animals and their adoptive families. She would marry a kind man who shared her passion for helping others, and together they would adopt 3 children from foster care, giving them the same chance at happiness that she had received. Hope lived to be 28 years old, spending her final years teaching children with special needs how to ride and trust. When she finally passed away peacefully in the pasture where she had been born, Sarah was there to say goodbye to the horse who had been her first friend in her new life. The farm continued to be a place where lost children found their way home. Jack and Margaret, even in their golden years, continued to open their doors to kids who needed temporary shelter or permanent families. The walls of their house were covered with photos and letters from children who had found their start in life at Morrison Farm. And in Sarah's office, in a place of honor on her desk, sat a small framed photo of a young woman and a little girl standing next to an old pickup truck. Beneath the photo was a simple inscription, "Love finds a way." The story that had begun with a desperate mother's plea had become a legacy of hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage and love could create something beautiful. Sarah kept all of her mother's letters, and when she faced difficult decisions in her adult life, she still turned to those words of wisdom and encouragement. Linda's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her daughter had grown up to be exactly the kind of person Linda had hoped she would become: kind, strong, successful, and dedicated to making the world a better place for others who needed help. The little girl who had once asked if a stranger could take care of her had grown up to take care of countless others, completing a circle of love that had started with one mother's impossible choice and one rancher's silent nod of acceptance. In the end, it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.